was constantly preoccupied with Torah and the needs of Am Yisrael. When he was here in this world for 94 years, may he be Zocheh Meretz Hashem to continue his advocacy on high, and may Meretz Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu see fit to only shower Klal Yisrael with Geulas, with Yeshuas, and with Nechamas. And we'll say with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Yud Gimel. We are picking up Meretz Hashem on Yud Gimel Amud Alpha Yashkoch to Rav Kalman Akiva for the beautiful daf yesterday, and we are picking up at the 2 dots on 13a. 2, 4, 5 lines down from the top. So the Gemara says as follows. Good, Chavran Zoom, we're still good? Excellent. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows. Ketzad potros tsaros sehem. So remember again, the Mishnah was speaking about the concept of tsaras tsara. So Rabbi says, so remember again, if you happen to still have the first sheet from the first day, this is going to be one of the most important sheets we're going to have. I believe I posted it on the WhatsApp group also, so you'll still have it. If it's there, I'll make additional copies in Meretz Hashem for tomorrow, just to once again show you very quickly. You don't actually need it for the moments from the moment, just to clarify what we're talking about. The Tsaras Tsara, which was table A on the handout that I'd given you. So we'll say, so if you remember again, you have 3 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven is married to 2 women, Rachel and Leah. Rachel also happens to be the daughter of Shimon. So remember, so Reuven married his niece. Leah, totally unrelated. So remember again, Rachel and Leah, the 2 wives of Reuven, are what we call tsaros, co-wives. Okay, so far everything fine. Reuven passes away. So I'll say, remember again, the way our whole journey in Yevamos got started was how? Was reminding us Shimon now potentially would be willing to do Yibum. There's only one problem, which is one of the wives is his daughter. So remember again, the first halacha we learned is therefore Shimon can't go ahead and do Yibum, because again, not only is the erva not eligible for yibum, but the tzara, the co-wife of the erva, is also not eligible for yibum. So again, just to go through, so therefore Shimon obviously can't do yibum with Rachel because that's his daughter, and he can't do yibum with Leah because she is the co-wife, the tzara of an erva of his daughter. Fine. What happens if you go down now in table A to the second section there? Levi ends up doing Yibum with Leah. So Levi does Yibum with Leah. So what happens? So remember again, Levi now also happens to have another wife by the name of Miriam. So Levi now has 2 wives. Leah, who's the Yibum wife, and Miriam, who is an unrelated wife. Now Levi dies. So both say, so now what happens? Levi's 2 wives fall to Shimon. Now both say, now remember again, Leah was the co-wife of the erva. She was the tzara to what was Shimon's daughter Rachel, Miriam unrelated. So both say, what the Mishnah introduced to us was the following. The tsaras tzara. Miriam is the co-wife of the co-wife, right? Remember again, she is the co-wife of Leah, who was the co-wife of Rachel, who was an erva to Shimon. This is the tsaras tsara case, and therefore in this case, Miriam doesn't do yibum as well. So there's no yibum. We'll say this, it's actually a pretty straightforward case, especially when you see it in print. That's the case of tsaras tsara. Beautiful, that's it. Says the Gemara, how do you know that a tsaras tsara, or in this case, Rabosai, again, just operating off this table, that Miriam, the co-wife of the co-wife, would not do yibum? So the Gemara says, litzrar. Because we both say the Torah uses the lashon of litzrar. The ishal achosa lo sikach litzrar. Both remember again, this is the aleha pasuk. We've always been focused on aleha, but the same pasuk also says litzrar. What did we learn from litzrar? HaTorah ribsat saros harbe. Now both say what we're going to see is litzrar essentially says anyone, we'll call it maritally connected to the erva, takes on erva status. Litzrar means essentially if you are bound in any type of marital fashion to the erva, albeit even indirectly, because you must remember again, if you look back at that chart, if you look back at that table for just a moment, you'll see, by the way, that Miriam really is only indirectly connected to Rachel, right? Remember, I will say, what's Miriam's connection to Rachel? What's Miriam's connection? Right? Remember again, Miriam is the co-wife of Leah, who was the co-wife of Rachel. right? So Miriam is really a degree removed, but nevertheless, the Gemara is saying is Litzrar teaches me that halacha l'maisa, any level of connection is enough to invalidate for Yibum purposes. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Rav Ashi Amar, Svarahi. Rav Ashi says the truth is, it's a svara. It's a logic. It doesn't even need a pasuk. My time asira de makom erva kaima. So we'll say, so comes along, Rav Ashi will say like this. Let's go back for just a moment. Why is it that Leah is disqualified from Yibum with Shimon? Because she's connected to an erva. B'makom erva kaima. Tzara nami b'makom erva kaima. A tzara also is connected to the erva, which I will say they're pretty much saying the same thing. They're just coming out of different ways. So the first approach, Rabbi Yehuda will say it's a pasuk litzror, and litzror says anyone maritally connected to the erva by definition is disqualified from yibum. Rav Ashi will say it's a svara. The svara is anyone maritally connected to the erva will be disqualified from yibum. But they're essentially saying the same idea. Any level of bond to the erva, by definition, will disqualify you. And I will say, this is indeed the halacha. We'll see the halacha in just a moment. But we do pass this way, halacha l'maisa. Tzara is going to be asura in yibum as well. So therefore, I will say again, going on that table, Miriam, who was the unrelated wife of Levi, right? Remember again, Miriam was minding her own business. She was married to Levi before all of this other stuff happened. It then happens to be that Levi did Yibum with Leah, who was the tzara of an erva, that when Leah brings that to the marriage, so ultimately again, that status is conferred upon Miriam as well. Beautiful. Kate Sarim Mesu. So we'll say, remember again, the next part of the Mishnah dealt with the following case. So the next part of the Mishnah was like this. So we'll say, if you take a look for just a moment, go back to that same table. The one we're just using, this one, we'll say table A, right? The first handout I gave you on the Masechta, I'll actually post it on the WhatsApp group again today. So I'll say the first, I think I did post it the first time, right? When we started Yevamos? Did I put it on there? Okay, good. So it says, you could see it. It's in the, what do they call it? Good. On the right, it's from the art scroll. Yeah. So I'll say, so remember, just taking a look at this for just a moment. So go back to table A for just a second. Once again, Reuven is married to two women, Rachel and Leah. And we'll say, when does the whole tsaras erva and ultimately tsaras tsara, when does that kick in? When does that kick in? Simple answer. When does it kick in? When Reuven dies. The last part of the Mishnah said like this. What happens had Reuven divorced Rachel before he died? Right? So we'll say, we're not up to Ibum right now. We're not up to Ibum, right? Everything is going fine. Well, I guess not everything is going fine, right? Reuven does divorce Rachel, right? But the idea is, meaning everyone's alive and well, and Reuven divorces Rachel. After Reuven divorced Rachel, then he dies. In that case, the Mishnah says, Shimon kidu Yibum with Leah. Why? Well, I will say why. Because at the time of death, Leah didn't have the status of a tsaras erva, right? The status of tsaras erva is only concretized at the time of death. But at the time of death, ultimately, again, Reuven's not married to Rachel anymore. There's no erva situation over here. Leah is fit for Yibum. It's fit for Yibum. So says the Gemara, Va'afilu kines ulbasov giresh. Now, the Gemara is actually choosing to illustrate this ultimately, again, with the case of Achos Ishto, with the case of wife's sister. So the Gemara says, is this true even if halacha l'maisa, first he got married, right? First there was marriage, then only afterwards there was a divorce. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Rashi says, actually not yet. V'kin sa megared shumes. No, not yet. So, we'll say, watch this. Va'afilu kines ulabasov girish. So the Gemara says, is this true even if halacha l'maisa, the second brother were to marry the sister before the other one divorced? Or minu? So the Gemara is a kasha. You'll see how this makes sense in just a moment. Gimel achim. We'll say, new case. This, by the way, is the handout for today. And we'll say it looks much more complicated than it actually is. Take a look at Moshe. So on this piece of paper that I sent you, I was telling the Chavra before, I'm very excited because I found this book from the last cycle. I was very happy here. Also, all the men wear hats and have beards, and all the women wear tichels. So I felt like this is a proper sefer for our shir. Right? So again, it happens to be, the pictures are a little, we'll see inside. We'll say this is the case. Let's take a look. Let's read it first outside. Gimel achim, shnayim mehen nisuim beis achayos, ve'echad nasui nochris. So we'll say, let's begin. Here is the case. 3 brothers. I made extra copies of the sheet if anyone needs. We'll say, so on the sheet, take a look at what's called picture 78.1. 78.1. So we'll say, now listen to this. You have 3 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Now what happened over here, I will say, it's only the first line that gets a little bit confusing. Listen to this. If you look on 78.1, but look at the second line there in 78.1, you have 3 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Now what happened over here is as follows. Reuven and Shimon married sisters, right? Reuven's married to Machla, and Shimon's married to Noah, and they are sisters. They're sisters. Levi is married to an unrelated woman. Unrelated woman. Fine. But let's say now what happens? What happens? So let's first read in the Gemara. Girish echa mibale achayos ishto umeis. We're supposed to now listen to this. What happens next? It's actually umeis hanasui nachris the kinsa magarish. So okay, so let's take a look at 78.2 now. What happened? Reuven divorced Machla. Reuven divorced Machla, right? You see in 78.2, you see Reuven and Machla, there's that little get in between them over there, right? Unfortunately, again, not all is good in paradise. So what happens? So Reuven divorces Machla, okay? We'll say, good, that's step 2. Step 3, 78.3, Levi passes away. Levi passes away. A lot happening in this mishpacha, right? Levi passes away. So we'll say, so now remember again. So now let's read it. We're going to try to read concurrently in the Gemara. So umeis hanasui nachris. So 78.3 Levi. Now we'll say in this context, nachris doesn't mean that he married a non-Jewish woman, right? Nachris means he didn't marry a sister. Right? He's married to someone who's not related to anyone else. So Levi, who is married to an unrelated woman, ultimately again dies. That's the big black line through Levi. Right? 78.3, Levi's gone. Levi's gone. Well, say now what happens? Okay, so Meis Hanasei Nachris, Vikinsa Hamegarish, who does Yibum? Who does Yibum? Reuven does Yibum. So we'll say that's 78.3. If you look in that picture, Levi dies, black line through him. And now Reuven, his brother, does Yibum with the woman. She doesn't have a name in this picture. She's just called Nachris. Right? So ultimately, and he does Yibum with her. Okay, so far so good. Right? Now what happens? I will say, Vikinsa Megarish Umeis. Then I will say in 78.4, the final part of this is Reuven, who did Yibum, dies. Now remember, there's more to Reuven's story. What was Reuven's story? Reuven was originally what? Married to Machla, who was one of the sisters. So I will say, so if you just put this all together, again, it's actually, like I said, it's a pretty straightforward case. 3 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Ultimately, Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. Levi is married to a Nachris, unrelated woman. Second stage over here, Reuven divorces his wife Machla, who was one of the sisters. Third stage, Levi passes away, and Reuven, who's now single because he got divorced, Reuven does Yibum with the Nachris. Okay? And now finally in stage 4, Reuven passes away, and ultimately again, now, okay, so now let's go back to the Gemara. Umeis hanasei nachris, the Gen Samagash, umeis, harezohi sha'amru, shemesu oniskarshu, tsarosehen mutaros. So say, what's the halacha? Shimon, who is now the last surviving brother, is permitted to go ahead and do Yibum with Nachris. Now, Rabosai, says the Gemara, Shimon is permitted to do Yibum. Why? Because Rabosai, Nachris is not Itzaras Erva. Why is Nachris not Itzaras Erva? Why not? Because Rabosai, because Bepashtos, because Reuven had divorced his wife before he ever married Nachris. Now, Rabosai, the Gemara makes an amazing observation here, which is the reason why Shimon is permitted to go and do Yibum with Nachris is because Reuven divorced his wife before he ever did Yibum with Nachris. The inference from that is what? Had Reuven been married to his wife, who was an erva to Shimon, even had he divorced her before he died, the tsaras erva status would have been conferred to Nachris, and ultimately, again, Yibum would have been invalid. Now, both say this is an incredible yisod. So what's happening? So all the Gemara is picking up on, is the order of events. So let me read it once more in the Gemara. Taima the Girish va'achar kines. So Rabbi say, let's go to 78.4 on this sheet. Why is it that Shimon is permitted to go ahead and do Yibum with Nachris? Why? Because Rabbi say, if you notice in this case, what happened? Reuven had, I'm looking in 78.4. Reuven had divorced his wife Machla before he did Yibum. Now remember, Machla was Shimon's wife's sister. That's an erva. So Rabbi say, what does the Gemara say? When Reuven dies, Shimon is permitted to do Yibum with Nachris. Rabbi say, now the Gemara is saying, why is that so? Because halacha l'maisa, Reuven had divorced his wife, Machla, before he ever did Yibum with Nachris. What is the Gemara inferring? Had Reuven been married to Machla, at the time that he did Yibum with Nachris, what would have happened? What would have become Nachris' status? Tsaras erva. She would have become the co-wife of an erva, because she would have become the co-wife of Machla, who was the sister-in-law of Shimon. And what it sounds like, Rabbi say, is that even halacha l'maisa, had Reuven gone ahead and divorced her before he passed away, that Saras Erva status still would have been there. Taima, back to the Gemara, de giresh va'achar kach kines. Aval kines va'achar kach giresh lo. Rabbi say, I'm going to make this much simpler. I know it can't really get much simpler than I've already made it, but I'll try. I'll say, so now watch this. It's actually very simple. If we take a step back, right? Remember again, let's go back to for everything. We'll say this is the guiding light for Yevamos. So remember again, if we go back to the first chart, what's the case of Tsaras Erva? The case of Tsaras Erva, Rabbi says, remember again, Reuven is married to two women, Rachel and Leah, and Rachel is the daughter of Shimon. Okay, so the classic case of Tsaras Erva is Reuven dies. Could Shimon do Yibum? No. Why not? He can't do Yibum with Rachel. Why? It's his daughter. He can't do Yibum with Leah. Why? It's the tzara. It's the co-wife of his daughter. The Mishnah had a second case. Well, actually, it's the last case. What was the last case? Reuven divorced Rachel before he died. Obviously, you can't divorce a woman once you're dead, right? He divorced her before he died. What did the Mishnah say? When Reuven now dies, what's the halacha? Shimon can do Yibum with Leah. All the Gemara is pointing out, Rabbi say, is the case of what we call, this is the case of Gimel Achim, which we're going to spend much more time on. The case of Gimel Achim seems to say that the only way to avoid a Tsaras Erva situation, so Rabbi say, so based on our Mishnah, it sounds like, when is the status of Tsaras Erva concretized? When is it concretized? At the time of death. Right? So in other words, if ultimately, again, there are two wives, and one of them is an erva, so the other one automatically becomes a tzaras erva at the time of death. But again, if something happened before, let's say divorce happened, let's say the husband divorced the wife, what we'll call the erva wife. It's not an erva to him, it's an erva to the other, right, to his brothers. If he divorced the erva wife before he died, then ultimately, again, there's no tzaras erva. So we'll say, from our Mishnah, again, this is what to remember, from our Mishnah it sounds like, the status of tsaras erva is concretized at the time of death. The Gemara brings up the case of the three brothers, because from the case of Shlosha Achim, it does not sound that way. From the case of Shlosha Achim, it sounds like, when is the status of tsaras erva concretized? When? During marriage. See, at the time of marriage, because remember again, going back now to this other chart, it sounds like, if you look at 78.4, that the reason why Shimon is permitted to marry Nachris is why? Because halacha l'maisa, Reuven had divorced his wife prior to doing Yibum, which sounds like the Tsaras Erva status is concretized when? At the time of marriage. Rabbi say one last simplification because it feels like I'm failing at simplifying it. Rabbi say, go back to the first chart. I'm just going to show it to you all over here. It's very simple. There seems to be machlokes. When is Saras Erva solidified? According to our Mishnah, it sounds like the Saras Erva status is solidified and concretized at the time of death. From the case of three brothers, it sounds like it's actually solidified at the time of marriage. So if you look back at this first chart, table A, so we'll say take a look once more at Ruvain. Ruvain's married to two women, Rachel and Leah. Rachel and Leah, right? Rachel is Shimon's daughter, and therefore she's an erva. Leah is the co-wife of an erva. So I will say from our Mishnah, it sounds like Leah only becomes the co-wife of an erva when? From our Mishnah, when Ruvain dies. When Ruvain dies. So according to our Mishnah, had Ruvain divorced Rachel, right, and then died, Leah would be eligible for Yibum. According to the case of the three brothers, what it sounds like is like this. The moment that Ruvain marries Rachel, let's assume for a moment Ruvain was married to Leah first and then he marries Rachel. The moment he marries his niece Rachel, Leah automatically becomes a tsaras erva. That, in other words, Zabot said, what we do is we kind of look at Leah's status in a what-if scenario. We know from the moment that Ruvain marries Rachel, if he were to die without children, ultimately Leah would be a tsaras erva. Therefore, we confer that status upon her at the moment that Ruvain marries Rachel. Rabbi say, what's the nafkamina between these two approaches? Very simple. According to our Mishnah, if Ruvain divorces Rachel before he dies, Leah is eligible to Yibum to all the brothers. According to what we just read in the case of Gimel Achin, once Ruvain marries Rachel, even if he divorces her before he dies, Leah is forever considered to be a tsaras erva. Rabbi say fundamental riveting machlokes. See, here we go. So Rabbi say, so which one is it? So which one is it? Oh, sorry. So says the Gemara. I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah, Tavra, Misha Shanazu, Lo Shanazu. Rabbi says, you're right. It's a machlokes. It's a machlokes, two different opinions. One opinion in the Mishnah, ultimately, again, one opinion as expressed. One opinion as expressed in the case of Gimel Achim. So the Gemara says, Hai Tana Savar Misam Apeles, V'Hai Tana Savar Nisun Harashonim Apil. Both say, this is a beautiful formulation. When is tsaras erva status concretized? Is it concretized at the moment of marriage, or is it concretized at the moment of death? In other words, they're both saying, when a man marries a woman, so do we look at what were to happen right now if he were to die without children? Who would be eligible to? And everyone's status, so to speak, is concretized at that moment. Or do we say no? Yibum status is only concretized when? When the husband dies. So we'll say that's the machlokes unfolding over here. Our Mishnah holds Misa Mapeles. Ultimately, again, Yibum status, or in this case, Tsaras Erva status, is solidified at the time of death. The opinion, ultimately, again, in the case of Gimel Achim, ultimately holds that Halacha L'Maisa, Tsaras Erva status is solidified at the time of marriage. To which the Gemara says, Rav Rava says no. The Olam Chatanu. Rabbi said Rava disagrees. He says no. There's no machlokes here. It's one Tana. Both of our Mishnah and the case of Gimel Achim. So the Gemara says, V'zu ein zu tzarech lomar. I'm sorry. V'zu ve'ein tzarech zu lomar. V'zu ve'ein tzarech lomar zu katani. Rabbi said, it's kind of, there is a Mishnaic style where you say, once you say one thing, you don't have to say something else, but you say it anyway. It is obvious that if you divorce the erva wife before you marry the second wife, that obviously the second wife doesn't have tsaras erva status. That's obvious, right? So in this table that we saw over here, right, in today's table, the fact that Ruvain goes ahead and divorces Machala before doing Yibum with Nochris, that's clear that Nochris doesn't have tsaras erva status. Why is that clear, Rabbi saying? Why is that clear? Because because Nochris was never in the picture when Ruvain was married to the erva wife. So we'll say, our Mishnah is the bigger Chiddush, right? Our Mishnah is the bigger Chiddush. Our Mishnah teaches us that at the end of the day, even if Ruvain was married to both wives at the same time, but he goes ahead and divorces using this table. He divorces Rachel before he passed away. Leah does not have erva status. So both say, so the truth is, once we quoted the case in our Mishnah, you don't really have to state another case, but the Gemara does it anyway. So both say, so how do we paskin halacha l'maisa? We paskin, both say, here's what to remember. It's very simple. We paskin, saras erva status is determined at the time of death. Like every other Yibum scenario, we look at relationships at the moment the man dies. So therefore, again, I will say, for our purposes, just going back to the original chart, right? Reuven, when he passes away, if he is married, so at the time of his death, to Rachel and Leah, then Leah becomes a tsaras erva, the co-wife of an erva, and therefore she is precluded from Yibum with Shimon. But if Reuven were to divorce Rachel sometime before he died, then ultimately when he dies, there is no remnant of that marriage on Leah, and Leah is a free agent for Yibum. So in other words, Yibum status determined time of death. And therefore, by extension, Saras Erva status, or Erva status for that matter, determined time of death. That's the halacha. Incredible. That's halacha. Well, so good. Let's go weiter. So since I'm saying, like, it's interesting with this, that a lot of these concepts are actually very uncomplicated. Both like that bottom line is very simple and straightforward. It's the illustration of the cases that sometimes gets a little bit convoluted, but the halacha l'maisa is quite simple and straightforward. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, "V'chol she'echol l'ma'in." So remember again, this was the last case in the Mishnah. So remember again, this was a case of miyun. Remember again, we saw before that halacha l'maisa. What's the miyun case? Remember, let's say there's a minor daughter, and remember, a father has the ability to go ahead and marry off his daughter and create biblical kiddushin. Let's say halacha l'maisa, there's no father in the picture. The brother and the mother have the ability to enter the daughter into marriage as well, but it is only a rabbinic marriage. V'haraya, there's an easy way to dissolve it, which is miyun. What's miyun? Refusal. The girl could literally say, I don't want to be married to this man, and that's it. We're done. So I will say, so the last case in the Mishnah was as follows. Let's say Reuven is married. This is not a tsaras erva case right now, right? It can be a tsaras erva case. Let's say Reuven is married to Kitana. We're just going to call her Kitana. And what happens? He dies. So I will say, so now, what did the Mishnah say? So I will say, let's go back to this original case. Let's say now on this chart, what do you have? You have Reuven married to Rachel and Leah. I will say, let's say in this case, Rachel is a Kitana. Rachel's a Kitana. So Reuven dies, and ultimately, again, Rachel never did miyun. Now I will say, now in this case over here, so it's actually interesting, because in this case, right, it's going to be, what the Mishnah says, what's the halacha? The halacha is, if she did not do miyun, so Leah, the co-wife, has to do chalitza and can't do yibum. Now I will say, now what's unique about this case? Really, Leah should be able to do yibum. Why should they be able to do yibum? Because Rachel, who's the erva wife, what's the nature of her marriage? It's d'Rabbanan. But because, again, it is a marriage, the halach is Leah has to do chalitza. And I both say, now this is different than all of our previous cases. Because in all of our previous cases, if you were the tzara of an erva, what did you have to do? Nothing. Right? There's no yibum, there's no chalitza. In this case, because the erva is only in the context of a rabbinic marriage, we go ahead and we make the Leah, the co-wife, the tzaras erva, do chalitza and can't do yibum. Good, that's the case. So says the Gemara, v'temayin hashta v'tisyabim. So I don't understand. Why not just have Rachel do miyun right now? Let her do miyun right now to the yavam, right? And I'm both say, what happens if she does miyun? By the way, what are the mechanics of miyun? What does miyun do? Miyun fundamentally, almost like retroactively, undoes marriage. There's no marriage. Therefore, I will say, it turns out that Reuven was, quote unquote, never married to Rachel. If Reuven was never married to Rachel, then Leah is not a tsaras erva. And Leah is therefore free to do yibum. So v'temayin hashta v'tisyabim. So let Rachel do miyun right now, and let Leah do yibum. To which the Gemara said, "Let me say Rav Oshia." The Rav Oshia, mima'enes lema'amaro ve'ina mima'enes lezekaso. Oh, so we'll say we're going to get into this concept of zika, but take a look at Rashi for just a moment. So we'll say we had ma'amar in yesterday's daf, right? So ma'amar, remember again, is like the quasi kiddushin. Technically speaking, when a man is ready to do yibum, so we'll say again, we're just going to use this same chart. So Reuven passes away, Shimon, his brother, is going to do yibum. Technically speaking, what affects yibum? Bia, active relations. Right? Halach l'maisa, there's a concept, midrabanan, called ma'amar. So ma'amar, kishmo kenu, is literally, again, a verbal declaration, a verbal declaration that I'm going to do yibam with this woman. That's called ma'amar. So the Gemara says something very interesting. Look at Rashi. Le'ma'amaro, hu di mima'enes, shem asa hayava ma'amar bi'yivam ekitana, u'miyana bo, mafkia miyun es ha'ma'amar, v'chazra l'zeika levada, v'choletzes. The afagav the gedolah she'asaba ma'amar velo ratza lichnos kam be'ram gamil tzricha gel ma'amar v'chalitza lezekaso hacha miyun akar le'ma'amar velo bayagita. So I'll say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, you see from here something very interesting, which is, if Rachel, who in this case is the Kitana girl, right, she was the Kitana, married off by her brother or by her mother. Now again, her husband Reuven passes away. Shimon does ma'amar. If she now does miyun, that miyun undoes the ma'amar. So we'll say, what happens when you undo ma'amar? It puts you back in the general yibum pool. See, because miyun is enough to undo ma'amar, but it's not enough to undo the zeka. Look at Rashi. Veina ma'amenes lezekaso la'akor nisur mishonu lafkia zekas yibum v'lazes below chalitza v'hachana migabi erva lo akor lamiyun dahachli nisun kamai lemishri tarasa. And I will say, now here's what's interesting. This is actually going to be the next parak. The concept of zika. Zika literally means a connection, right? The connection. When ultimately, again, a man passes away without children, there is a zika, what we call a zika bond between the brothers and the widow. So here's what's interesting is, it appears, if Rachel did miyun while Reuven was still alive, so what would happen? She would fundamentally undo the marriage as if it never occurred. Once Reuven dies, she now has the ability to exercise miyun, and what miyun could do is, if one of the brothers had done ma'amar, miyun could undo the ma'amar and put it back in the general yibum pool. But it would appear that what can't miyun accomplish? Miyun, at the point that Reuven has now died, miyun can't undo the marriage anymore and remove her from the yibum pool in its totality. So the Gemara says, the Ravoshia, so we'll say, now what's the proof of that? The proof of that is, what did the Mishnah say? Reuven passes away and leaves behind two wives, Rachel and Leah. Rachel is Shimon's daughter. So now again, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says Leah has to do chalitza. But why not just go ahead and have Rachel do miyun? Have Rachel do miyun, let her undo everything, and that way Leah is a free agent for Yibum. So both say, the Gemara says, it appears that, what do you see from here? It appears that once Reuven dies, Rachel no longer has the option to do miyun, to undo the marriage to her now deceased husband. The most that her miyun could do is undo ma'amar, but can't undo the zeka. To which the Gemara says, no. To which the Gemara says, lo, tsaras erva sheni. No, I will say, it's not true. In fact, I will say, we're going to see that halacha l'maisa, in a case where Reuven passes away and he leaves behind two wives, Rachel and Leah. If Rachel was a kitana, right, and she was married off with miyun, assuming she's still a kitana, she could do miyun even after Reuven dies, and what? And undo the entire marriage to Reuven. So if that's the case, why do we make Leah do chalitza? Right? Let Leah do yibum. To which the ones I'll tell you. The Tanam Recheskel, miyana bebal muteres la'avir. Boss, listen to this. General non-yibum case. Let's say Reuven's married to Rachel, right? And Rachel ultimately, again, as a kitana, she was married to Reuven with rabbinic marriage. So we'll say, what happens if Rachel decided to do miyun? She's permitted to marry Reuven's father, Yaakov. Why is she permitted to marry Reuven's father, Yaakov? Why? Because we'll say, what does miyun do? It undoes the marriage in its totality, right? There's no marriage. So therefore, again, if Reuven's married to Rachel, and it was a rabbinic marriage, and Rachel the Kitana does miyun, she's permitted to marry Reuven's father. However, Mina biyavam asur la'aviv. But also, interestingly enough, if in the case where Reuven passes away, now, right, and let's say Rachel did miyun to Shimon, to the Yavam, halacha l'maisa, she can't marry their father, right? Why? Alma mishas nefila nira kikaloso. Because the concern is like this. After Rachel falls to Yibum, right, she really has the legitimate appearance as what? Reuven's wife, and what we'll call Yaakov's daughter-in-law. See, even though on a technical halachic level, were she to exercise the miyun option, she would undo everything and technically be eligible to her former husband Reuven's father. Once Reuven dies and she falls to Yibum, it appears that a relationship has been solidified and concretized. Therefore, we would not allow her to marry her now deceased husband's father. So the Gemara says, "Hachanami mishas nefila niris kitzaras bito." So too over here, halacha l'maisa. In this case over here, the co-wife Leah has the appearance ultimately again of being a tsaras erva, and therefore we force her to do chalitza. But say, let's bring this all together, right? So in this sugya, what comes out over here? So first of all, in the realm of miyun, this is very important. Halacha l'maisa, a girl has the ability to do miyun even after her husband has passed away, which is really fascinating. So technically speaking, in this case, where Rachel, Rachel, who is the erva wife, right, was a kitana, and now Reuven dies, so she falls to Yibum. Technically, a girl who is a kitana in a dirabanan marriage could do miyun to her yavam. And what happens when she does miyun? What happens? She undoes the marriage in totality. The case of the Mishnah is a little bit different, because in the case of the Mishnah, Rachel, again, operating off the first chart over here, Rachel, who is the co-wife of Leah, right? Rachel is the erva wife, Leah is the co-wife. But we'll say technically what we suggest over here is what? What should we tell Rachel? Rachel, just do miyun. When Rachel does miyun, what happens? Rabbi say, what happens? What happens? The entire marriage retroactively is undone, which leaves Leah what? Leaves Leah what? Eligible for Yibum. So that's what we should tell her. But the Mishnah says we don't do that. Why? Because when Reuven passes away and Rachel, falls for Yibum, we'll say there is the appearance of a legitimate marriage. And once there's the appearance of a legitimate marriage, we're concerned that if we let Leah do Yibum, what's going to happen? People will mistakenly think that a tsaras erva is permitted to go ahead and do Yibum. So therefore, what do? We tell Leah, you have to do chalitza. That's the halacha bosai, and that indeed is halacha l'maisa. Therefore, bosai, a number of very important pieces halacha l'maisa come out over here. First of all, we paskin tsaras tsara is going to be aser, right? Number two, halacha l'maisa, yibum status is established when? Yibum status is established when? At the time of death. Number three, a girl has the ability to do miyun even to her yevama, and ultimately again go ahead and undo the previous marriage. And number four, in a case where a woman is the tsaras erva of a kitana, even though we should tell the kitana just do miyun and let the tzara do yibum, it's almost like marasayin, right? It just has if we're nervous that if we were to allow Leah, the co-wife of the kitana erva, to do yibum, that people would think that tsaras erva is permitted in yibum. Therefore, we tell in that case the tsaras erva to do chalitza. Beautiful. Beautiful. There are 6 more stringent cases. Now, the truth is, chamur in this case it's actually not chamur. Rashi already points this out. They're different. There are 6 more cases where essentially yibum is impossible. See, in the first 15 cases in the Mishnah, what happened? What was the common denominator in the first 15 cases? What was the common denominator? There was an erva, but the erva was only to who? Only to who? To one of the brothers. In other words, in all of the first 15 cases, there was a brother who was able to do yibum. It was possible. Just ultimately, again, one brother wasn't able to, but other brothers were. The Mishnah just pointed out over here, there are 6 cases where none of the brothers are able to do yibum. They will say, when's a case where all 6 brothers, what are cases where all brothers can't do yibum? Where the woman in question is paternally related to them. Because also remember, again, what's the determinant for brotherhood by yibum? Right? Same father. Same father. So we're going to have 6 cases, 6 women who are paternally related. And therefore, again, I will say all the Mishnah is saying is, Yibum is impossible to anyone. Now I will say, now here's the beauty of this. Remember, this is very, very exciting. Remember, if Yibum is impossible, then ultimately, again, what's the status of the co-wives in those situations? Mutter. Why? Because we'll say Tsaras Erva is only Aser when? B'makom mitzvah. Right? Co-wives are only disqualified when in a technical Yibum situation. But Allah Lamaisa, we saw this in last week's daf, Shelo b'makom, which is Friday's daf, Shushan Purim, right? Shelo b'makom mitzvah, ultimately against Saras Ervaz Mutter. We'll see it. So let's go. So Sheish Arayos Chamuras Melu. There are 6 cases that are more chamer. I will say again, it doesn't mean more chamer. It just means 6 cases where Yibum is impossible for any of the brothers. What are the cases? Ultimately, again, because they are married to others. Now I will say, what does it mean because they're married to others? Because they can't be married to any of the brothers, as you will see. Here we go. Therefore, tsarosehem mutaros. Therefore, I will say, their co-wives, by definition, are going to be mutter. Because remember again, the case of tsaras erva, a co-wife of an erva was only usher to me when? B'makom mitzvah, in a yibum scenario. Rabbi, remember again, can I just illustrate this for a moment? Allow me to illustrate this in just a moment. Let's say someone unrelated to me is married to my daughter. Someone unrelated to me is married to my daughter, right? So I'll say, well, we'll call him Ruvain. Ruvain's married to me. Now, of course, he happens to be related to me now because he's married to my daughter because he's my son-in-law. But let's say he's not related to me. In other words, I'll say, as opposed to one of my brothers marrying my daughter. Someone unrelated to me marries my daughter. We'll call her Rachel, okay? Now, let's say, again, unrelated guy also marries Leah. I will say, let's say unrelated guy doesn't get along with Leah. He divorces her. Could I marry Leah? Absolutely. But she was the co-wife of my daughter. Remember, co-wifery is only a problem in a Yibum scenario. That's called b'makom mitzvah. Shelo b'makom mitzvah, being the co-wife of an erva, does not have any negative impact. So the Gemara goes right there. So listen to this. So therefore, sheish arayos chamuros me'elu b'nei nesos la'acherim. Therefore, tzarosei mutaros. Imo, so we'll say, what are the 6 cases? Imo, one's mother. Now we'll say, one's mother, right? One's mother can never be married to any of one's brothers. Now we're assuming right now in this case that one's mother also happens to be married to one's father. Now we'll say, the truth is we're going to see that's not necessarily the case, because remember, we paskin not like Rabbi Yehuda, which is anusas aviv, right? A woman violated by my father is usher to me as well. Okay, Eishes aviv, father's wife, Achos aviv, father's sister, Imo Eishes aviv, Achos aviv, my father's sister, Achos me aviv, a paternal sister, Ve'eshes achi aviv, the wife of my father's brother, Ve'eshes achiv me aviv, and the wife of my paternal brother. So I will say, these are all cases where halacha l'maisa, there's no yibum. Why is there no yibum? Because none of the paternal brothers can marry any of these women. Because these are all paternal relations. Because they're all paternal. So we'll say, remember again, anyone who is paternally related to me is also what? Related to who? Any of my paternal brothers. And Yibum is determined by paternal relationship, right? We don't have to have the same mother, but we have to have the same father. So therefore, in these 6 cases, it's actually a very straightforward. I can give you, again, I dafka did not share with you the charts, because I will say I actually feel that in these cases, the charts make it 10 times harder. This is straightforward. All this is, these are 6 relations, right? 6 relatives who are paternally related to me. Because they're paternally related to me, therefore they are paternally related to all of my paternal brothers. Therefore, Yibum is impossible in any of these scenarios. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, these women, by definition, cannot be married to any one of my brothers, which means they're married to who? Who are they married to? Who are they married to? Someone who is what? Not related to me. Therefore, again, their tsaros, their co-wives, are permitted, right? Because again, tsaros erva are only problematic b'makom mitzvah and shalom ha'isa. Bosai, listen to this. I promised you a good daf today. Listen to this. Beishamai matirin hat tsaros la'achim. Bosai, this is wild. Beis Shammai now argues actually on the first Mishnah. Beis Shammai says, by the way, Beis Shammai says, Atzaras ervas mutter in yibum. What? The last 12 days of my life just came tumbling down. Right? I will say again, we've been building up the last 12 days since we started the Masechta that everything is, everyone agrees Saras ervas aser. Everyone agrees the koif of an erva is aser. Comes along Beis Shammai and says, no, by the way, the koif of an erva is mutter. Erva is aser in yibum, but the koif of an erva, you could do yibum with the koif of an erva. Okay? Beis Hillel says, no, it's absolutely aser. I'll say Amadeus. Choltzu. So we'll say what happens here. So we'll say, so just to illustrate this, just want to point out what just happened over here. Go back to the original table. Watch this. So we'll say, remember again, watch what just happened over here. Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. Right? So Beis Shammai says, Shimon can do Yibum with Leah. Shimon can do Yibum with Leah. Can't do Yibum with Rachel, obviously. It's his daughter, it's an erva. But he can do Yibum with Leah. Beis Hillel says, absolutely not. Tsaras erva is aser. Choltzu. So we'll say, now watch this. What happens, halacha l'maisa, if let's say Shimon did chalitza with Leah, so Beis Shammai posted min hakuna. Beis Shammai will say, well now, boss, we're going to see that a woman who underwent chalitza is like a grusha, is like a divorcee. So halacha l'maisa, if Shimon did chalitza with Leah, she's a chalitza and therefore asur to the kuna. Beis Hillel machshirin. Beis Hillel ultimately say that halacha l'maisa she's kasher. Because remember, Beis Hillel will say that Leah, again, this Leah, right? Leah is not subject to Yibum and Chalitza at all. Therefore, when you do Chalitza with her, what's the effect of that Chalitza? Meaningless. And therefore, she's totally permitted to the Kuna. So the Gemara says, Nis Yavmu. Now watch this. What happens if Halacha L'maisa, again, they did Yibum? Beis Shammai Machshir, Beis Hillel Postin. So this is pretty serious. Let's say again, Leah did Yibum. So again, Beis Shammai would say, no problem, it's kosher. Beis Hillel would say, Pasul. And I will say it's going to be more than puzzle. Beis Hillel would say that it's potential mamzerus, right? Pretty serious infraction. Then we'll say, now watch this. Even though again Beis Shammai Beis Hillel have such a dramatic machlokes, nevertheless, lo nimnu Beis Shammai b'nisa nashim Beis Hillel, v'lo Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai. Nevertheless, Beis Hillel married the woman of Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai married the woman of Beis Hillel. I will say now again, we'll qualify that in just a moment. Furthermore, again, kolataros vatmeu shayu elu mitar ve'elu mitamin lo nimnu osin taros elu agabe elu. And even though there were times where Beis Shammai Beis Hillel disagreed in Tumantara, sometimes Shammai said Tameh, Hillel said Tar, sometimes Hillel said Tar, Shammai said Tameh. They did not refrain from borrowing utensils one from the other. So I will say, what does it sound like? Even though they have this fundamental machlokes in halacha, there was still incredible respect and ultimate achdus. So we'll say, let's just clarify this in just a moment. According to Beis Shammai, tsaras erva is subject to yibum and chalitza. According to Beis Hillel, tsaras erva is what? Right? Fundamentally mufka, not in the parsha. Right? According to Beis Hillel, tsaras erva is the same thing as an erva herself. There's no yibum. Then I must understand what this means. According to Beis Shammai, going back to our original table, right? Let's just use this. I told you it's the best table. According to the original table, Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. Rachel's an erva. Leah is a tsaras erva. According to Beis Hillel, so there's no yibum and chalitza by Leah. According to Beis Shammai, Shimon, right? Shimon could do yibum with Leah. Now listen, now watch this. Let's say Shimon did yibum with Leah. Shimon did yibum with her. So according to Beis Shammai, what's the step? What happened? What did Shimon do? A mitzvah. According to Beis Hillel, if Shimon does yibum with Leah and they have children, what do we call those kids? Mamzerim. You married your brother's wife. That's an Isser Kares, and that's a mamzer. Now I will say, now the Mishnah says, oh, beautiful, but yet, even though they had this fundamental machlokas, ultimately, again, they married each other. What? How could that be? Now I will say, this is incredible. Look at Rashi. Lo nimnu, afa pisha b'nei atzara shenis yabmu ki Beis Shammai mamzerim hin leBeis Hillel. Even though, again, the children of this yibum scenario, which Beis Shammai permitted, were mamzer according to Beis Hillel. Shai be'isr eishes achi aleim ve'eishes ach b'kares u'b'nei arav shein chai ve'krisos mamzerim em ki darmina berkin afa filu hachi lo nimnu Beis Hillel milisa nashim Beis Shammai lefisha hayu modim lohem osam habos b'nazor separshim. I will say this is incredible. Rashi says, no. This is, don't get carried away. This is not like a kumbaya moment over here with Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, hey, everybody thinks great. No, but what happens is as follows. They got along, and Beis Hillel would marry women of Beis Shammai, but not these women, right? In other words, that on the shidduch resume, right? What would you have to put on there? Are you the product of a Beis Shammai yibum? And if you are, Beis Hillel would say, Hatzlacha Rabbah, but sorry, we're going to say no to the shidduch. As Rashi points out over here, they married each other, but Beis Hillel would not touch these kind of women, right? Or I should say, it's not just women. Beis Hillel would not go ahead and marry into products of this type of yibum union, because according to Beis Hillel, ultimately they were mamzerim. Shabbos say, by the way, what a profound yisod. You see, people think that shalom and respect means that I have to accept, right? If I really respect you and I love you, right, and I want shalom, I accept everything you say, and I accept everything you do. That's not what shalom means. Shalom means I respect your right to do whatever it is that you want to do, but I vehemently disagree. I respect it, but I don't accept it, right? I respect your right to have your opinion. I respect that. But I do not accept your opinion at all. I don't accept your way of life. I don't accept your ashka. I respect your right to have it. And I will never chas v'shalom mistreat you for having those ideas, for having those hashkafas, having those, but I do not accept it. A person is not obligated to accept that which they fundamentally feel is wrong. I shouldn't disassociate. I shouldn't slam the door. I have to respect even if I can't accept. And that's what's happening over here. And Abba said, by the way, if only we would learn to be able to do this, how much better the world would be, right? Abba said, if you want to know the number one problem in contemporary society, it's that we don't know how to act like Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. We don't learn how to respect without, right? We have to learn respect without acceptance, right? I don't accept what you're saying, and I don't accept but I respect you. I respect you. That was the master of Beis Shammai. So let's just go a little bit weiter. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Shimon ben Pazi, my time of the Beis Shammai. Why does Beis Shammai say that it's Saras Ereva? It's Chayiv in Yibum. Tichsiv lo siya eshes hameisa chutza leish zar. Both say this is wild. Because Beis Shammai holds, Rabbi, listen to this. This is the pasuk by Yibum. The Torah says that the wife of the deceased should not be achutza leish zar. The Rabbi say, the way we normally translate this pasuk is she shouldn't be achutza. What does chutza refer to? Someone other than the yavam. She should not marry someone else other than the yavam. Rabbi say, what Beis Shammai says, no. Hachutza is actually a modifier to the word eshes hames. The eshes hames who is chutza, who is further removed, should not be given to someone other than the yavam. Rabbi say, who is that? Chutza michlal deika pnimis. The fact that it calls her the outer wife tells us that there's an inner wife, a closer wife. Rabbi will say, who's the inner, who's the closer wife? Beis Shammai will say this. What is this referring to? This is referring to Reuben is married to two women. One of them is Rachel, one of them is Leah. Rachel is an erva to Shimon. Rachel is the Pnima. She's the wife who's a bit too close. Leah is the Chutza wife, the wife who's a little bit removed. And what does the Torah say according to Beis Shammai? Don't allow the Isha who is Chutza to marry someone else, i.e., she is still subject to Yibum. So the Gemara says, Chutz b'chad Yibum, v'amar Rachman lo siyah. Therefore, Beis Shammai learns from there that Allah l'maisa, even a tzaras erva has to do Yibum. She is the chutza. She's the outer wife. The wife is a little bit more removed, yet the Torah still says, don't let her marry someone else. She has to do Yibum. Beis Hillel requires that just Rav Yehuda Rav. Minayin shtei kiddushin tovsim b'Yevama. Both say this is wild. How do you know that if a man, let's say a husband dies and he's behind the Yevama, how do you know that if someone else tries to effect kiddushin with the Yevama, that the kiddushin doesn't work? Shneimar lo siya eishes hameis achutza leish zar lo siya ba havia lezar. Torah tells us that ultimately, if anyone else tries to effect kiddushin, it will not work. Beis Shammai, what did Beis Shammai say to that? Iksiv lochutz. If it would have said lochutz to the outside, I would have understood that. But chutza ksibba. Beis Shammai says, if it was just telling me that someone other than the Yavam can't marry this woman, it should have said la chutz. She cannot marry to the outside. Chutza is a modifier for isha. It's descriptive of her status. Beis Hillel will say that halacha l'maisa, since it says chutza, that's as if it says la chutz. How so? We'll stop over here for today. We'll say again. All right, we have a lot to do in Mirat Hashem. Incredible. But I will say, I will tell you the next couple of days, incredible Gemaras. We even get a little bit of Agarata in here. Yeah, it's true. Again, we'll say, do the Chazara. Shkayach, everyone.
On those 6 cases, how could the first brother marry these people? He can't marry his mother.